Karen was the kind of person who thrived on control. To her, being the president of the Homeowners Association, HOA, wasn't just a title, it was a lifestyle. She took immense pride in keeping her neighborhood picture perfect, where every blade of grass seemed to stand at attention and every mailbox sparkled under the sun. Her neighbors often joked that Karen probably dreamed in spreadsheets and color-coded charts, but no one dared laugh too loudly. Karen had a way of making even the smallest infractions feel like federal offenses. The HOA meetings were her domain, where she wielded her clipboard like a royal scepter. Every meeting followed the same script. Karen would call it to order, rattle off updates about new rules or fines, and then spend an hour answering questions from residents who mostly nodded along without argument. It wasn't that people particularly liked her methods. It was more that they didn't want to become her next target. And Karen always had a target. Whether it was Mr. Thompson for leaving his trash cans out overnight or Mrs. Lewis for hanging Christmas lights 2 weeks early, someone was always in her crosshairs. But things changed when Alex moved into the house next door. Unlike most newcomers, Alex didn't arrive with baked goods or friendly introductions. They simply appeared one weekend, quietly unpacking boxes while their moving truck idled in the driveway. At first glance, Alex seemed harmless enough. Young, maybe in their late 20s, with a calm demeanor and a habit of wearing headphones while working outside. But there was something different about them, something Karen couldn't quite put her finger on. Alex attended their first HOA meeting a week after moving in. They sat toward the back of the room, arms crossed, listening intently but saying very little. When Karen announced a new rule about restricting outdoor decorations to neutral tones only, Alex raised an eyebrow but stayed silent. When another neighbor asked if pet chickens were allowed in backyards, Alex smirked faintly but didn't join the debate. By the end of the meeting, Karen felt uneasy. Most residents either fawned over her decisions or grumbled quietly before complying. Alex did neither. Their indifference unsettled her. What made matters worse, at least in Karen's mind, was how Alex interacted with the neighborhood. They weren't rude, exactly, but they weren't overly friendly either. Neighbors who stopped by to welcome them were met with polite nods and brief conversations. Alex rarely lingered at the community pool or joined the monthly block parties. Instead, they spent most evenings tinkering in their garage or tending to a small patch of flowers near their front porch. It was as if Alex existed in their own little bubble, completely uninterested in Karen's carefully curated world. Karen tried not to let it bother her. After all, what harm could one quiet neighbor do? Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that Alex was up to something. Maybe it was the way they avoided eye contact during HOA meetings, or how they never once complimented Karen on her leadership skills. Whatever it was, Karen found herself watching Alex more closely than she cared to admit. Little did she know, this quiet newcomer would soon become the biggest challenge she'd ever faced, and one she was woefully unprepared for. It started innocently enough, a tiny garden gnome perched near Alex's front porch. Karen noticed it one sunny afternoon as she drove past, her usual route taking her slowly through the neighborhood to check for violations. At first glance, the gnome seemed harmless, almost whimsical. It was small, no taller than a loaf of bread, with a red hat and a cheerful smile. But to Karen, it represented something far more sinister, a blatant disregard for the rules. The HOA guidelines were crystal clear. Any decorative items visible from the street required pre-approval by the board. This wasn't just about aesthetics, it was about maintaining uniformity, ensuring that every home contributed to the neighborhood's polished appearance. And yet, here was Alex, flaunting their independence with a gnome that hadn't been vetted or approved. Karen felt her blood pressure rise as she pulled over and parked her car across the street. She grabbed her clipboard, adjusted her sunglasses, and marched up to Alex's front door, ready to address this egregious oversight. When Alex answered the knock, they looked surprised but not particularly concerned. Karen launched into her spiel, explaining the rule in clipped tones while clutching her clipboard like a shield. "This is a violation," she said firmly, pointing toward the gnome. "You need to submit a request form if you want to display anything outside your home." Alex blinked at her, then glanced at the gnome before shrugging. "I didn't know there was a rule about that," they replied calmly. "But sure, I'll look into it." Karen bristled at the casual response. Look into it. That wasn't the reaction she expected. Most neighbors would apologize profusely or scramble to comply immediately. Instead, Alex stood there, unfazed, as though Karen's authority meant nothing. Before she could press further, Alex added, "Thanks for letting me know," and closed the door gently. Fuming, Karen returned to her car. How dare Alex dismiss her so easily? Didn't they understand how much work she put into keeping the neighborhood pristine? As she drove away, she resolved to keep an eye on them. If Alex thought they could get away with ignoring the rules, they had another thing coming. Over the next few weeks, Karen found herself scrutinizing Alex's property more closely. She noticed minor details she previously overlooked. The grass was slightly longer than the HOA recommended height. The curtains in the living room window didn't match the neutral palette encouraged by the board, and there was an old bicycle leaning against the side of the garage. Each observation fueled her growing frustration. To her, these weren't just quirks. They were signs of rebellion. Then came the day when Karen decided she'd had enough. Claiming there was an urgent drainage issue affecting multiple properties, including Alex's, she showed up unannounced, expecting to walk right onto their backyard to investigate. After all, this was her neighborhood, and as HOA president, she believed she had every right to ensure compliance, even if it meant stepping onto private property without permission. But Alex refused. Standing in the doorway, arms crossed, they told Karen politely but firmly that she couldn't come in without prior notice. "If you need to check something, we can schedule a time," they said. "My backyard isn't open for impromptu inspections." Karen stared at them, dumbfounded, refusing entry. No one had ever dared to do that before. Her face flushed with anger as she stammered out a retort, but Alex remained unmoved. Frustrated and embarrassed, Karen left, muttering under her breath about how unreasonable some people could be. That evening, as she sat at her kitchen table reviewing HOA documents, Karen realized something unsettling. Alex wasn't playing by her rules. Worse still, they didn't seem afraid of her. For the first time in years, Karen felt powerless, and it terrified her. Karen couldn't let it go. The memory of Alex standing in their doorway, blocking her from entering their backyard, replayed in her mind like a broken record. It wasn't just the refusal itself that bothered her. It was the calm confidence with which Alex had done it. They hadn't raised their voice, made excuses, or even seemed particularly upset. Instead, they'd handled the situation as if Karen's demands were nothing more than a minor inconvenience, and that infuriated her. Over the next few days, Karen became obsessed with finding ways to assert her authority over Alex. She began scrutinizing their property with laser focus, searching for anything, no matter how small, that could be labeled a violation. Every time she drove past Alex's house, she slowed down, peering through her car window like a detective on a stakeout. Was that mailbox slightly crooked? Were those curtains really regulation approved? Her mind raced with possibilities, each one fueling her determination to regain control. Her first move was a barrage of emails. Late at night, after her husband had gone to bed, Karen sat at her computer crafting meticulously worded messages. "Dear Alex," one began, "I wanted to remind you that the HOA requires all decorative items visible from the street to be pre-approved. Please submit your request form for the gnome by Friday." Another email followed shortly after. "Hi Alex, I've noticed some uneven grass growth along the edge of your lawn. Could you please address this issue within the week?" She sent letter after letter, each one polite on the surface, but laced with thinly veiled threats about fines and penalties. But Alex didn't respond. Days turned into a week, and still there was no reply. Karen tried calling, leaving voicemails that grew increasingly impatient. "Alex, this is Karen from the HOA. I really need to discuss these matters with you. Please call me back." Each unanswered message only deepened her frustration. How dare they ignore her? Didn't they realize who she was? When her attempts at communication failed, Karen shifted tactics. She started rallying the neighbors, painting Alex as a troublemaker who refused to play by the rules. At first, her efforts were subtle. A casual comment here, a pointed question there. "Have you seen Alex's yard lately?" she'd say during coffee chats. "It's starting to look a bit unkempt, don't you think?" Some neighbors nodded politely, while others changed the subject. But Karen didn't care. Even if she couldn't win them over completely, planting seeds of doubt was enough. For now, her final gambit came during a routine HOA inspection. Armed with a clipboard and a camera, Karen marched up to Alex's property, snapping photos of every perceived infraction. The long grass, the mismatched curtains, even the gnome, which somehow seemed smugger than ever. She documented everything, convinced she finally had the ammunition she needed to bring Alex to heel. But as she stood there, clicking away, something unexpected happened. Alex appeared in the doorway again, watching her silently. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Alex broke the silence. "Taking pictures now?" they asked, their tone light but tinged with amusement. "Should I sign a waiver or something?" Karen froze, caught red-handed. "These are official HOA records," she snapped, trying to regain her composure. "You've been non-compliant with multiple regulations." Alex shrugged. "If you have concerns, send me an email. Or better yet, schedule a meeting. This feels a little excessive, don't you think?" Excessive. Karen's jaw tightened. Excessive was Alex refusing to follow the rules. Excessive was ignoring her calls and emails. Excessive was treating her, the president of the HOA, as if she were nothing more than a nosy neighbor. As she walked back to her car, clutching her clipboard tightly, Karen vowed to escalate things further. If Alex thought they could outlast her, they were wrong. Very wrong. The tension between Karen and Alex finally reached its boiling point at the monthly HOA meeting. The room buzzed with quiet chatter as residents trickled in, settling into folding chairs arranged in neat rows. Karen stood at the front, her clipboard clutched tightly to her chest, a storm brewing behind her carefully applied makeup. She had spent days preparing for this moment, rehearsing what she would say to expose Alex's defiance to the entire neighborhood. In her mind, this was the perfect opportunity to remind everyone why rules mattered, and why she was the only one capable of enforcing them. When the meeting began, Karen wasted no time getting to the heart of the issue. "There have been ongoing concerns about compliance within our community," she announced, her voice steady but laced with thinly veiled frustration. "Specifically, I'd like to address a situation involving one of our newer residents." She paused dramatically, scanning the room before landing her gaze on Alex, who sat near the back with arms crossed. Karen launched into her prepared speech, painting Alex as someone who flagrantly ignored HOA guidelines. "This individual has repeatedly failed to adhere to our policies," she continued, ticking off points on her fingers. "Unapproved decorations, uneven grass height, improper waste management. The list goes on. But perhaps most concerning is their refusal to allow me onto their property to inspect for potential drainage issues." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some neighbors exchanged uneasy glances, while others leaned forward, intrigued by the drama unfolding before them. Karen basked in the attention, convinced that her words were hitting their mark. Surely the room would side with her, the president who worked tirelessly to maintain order. But then something unexpected happened. Alex stood up. "I'd like to respond to those accusations," they said calmly, drawing every eye in the room. Karen's mouth dropped open slightly. This wasn't part of her plan. Alex walked toward the front, pulling out a folder from their bag. "First, let me clarify. There is no rule requiring homeowners to grant unscheduled access to anyone, including the HOA president. My refusal to let Karen onto my property without notice isn't defiance. It's exercising my right to privacy." The room fell silent. Alex opened the folder and held up printed emails and screenshots of texts sent by Karen. "As for the so-called violations, I've reviewed the HOA handbook thoroughly. There's nothing in there about uneven grass growth or mismatched curtains. And regarding the gnome," they smiled faintly, "I submitted a request form last week, just like Karen asked. It's currently under review." Karen's face flushed red. She hadn't expected Alex to be so prepared or so composed. Her accusations were crumbling under the weight of facts, and she could feel the tide turning against her. Several neighbors nodded approvingly, impressed by Alex's level-headedness. Alex pressed on. "If Karen has legitimate concerns about my property, she's welcome to schedule an inspection during reasonable hours, as stated in the HOA guidelines. What she can't do is harass me with constant emails, letters, and unannounced visits. If anyone here thinks that's acceptable behavior, I'd love to hear your thoughts." The silence in the room grew heavier. One neighbor cleared their throat nervously, while another whispered, "She's got a point." Karen shifted uncomfortably, suddenly aware that all eyes were now on her. Not Alex. For the first time, she felt exposed, her authority questioned not just by Alex, but by the very people she claimed to serve. When Alex finished speaking, they returned to their seat, leaving Karen standing alone at the front of the room. The meeting adjourned shortly after, but the damage was done. As residents filed out, many avoided making eye contact with Karen, whispering amongst themselves instead. Some even approached Alex to shake their hand, thanking them for speaking up. For Karen, it was a humiliating defeat. She had entered the meeting confident in her power, only to leave feeling stripped of it. And deep down, she knew this was just the beginning. Karen couldn't sleep that night. The memory of Alex standing at the front of the room, cool and collected, replayed over and over in her mind like a bad movie she couldn't turn off. She tossed and turned, staring at the ceiling, replaying every word Alex had said. How dare they make her look incompetent in front of the entire neighborhood? Karen wasn't used to being questioned, let alone challenged, and it left her seething with anger and embarrassment. The next morning, Karen woke up with a singular focus: retaliation. If Alex wanted to play hardball, then so be it. She spent hours combing through the HOA guidelines, searching for anything, no matter how minor, that could justify further action against them. By noon, she had compiled a list of complaints so exhaustive it bordered on absurd. Noise violations. Alex occasionally played music while working in their garage. Improper waste disposal, a recycling bin left out one evening, and even disruptive behavior during the HOA meeting itself. Each item was documented meticulously, complete with timestamps and witness statements from neighbors who were either too intimidated or too annoyed with Alex to refuse her. But Karen didn't stop there. She began spreading rumors, leaning on her position as HOA president to sway public opinion. During casual conversations, she painted Alex as someone who thought they were above the rules, someone who disrespected the community's values. "It's not about the gnome or the grass," she'd say with an air of concern. "It's about setting a precedent. If we let one person ignore the guidelines, what's next? Chaos." Some neighbors nodded along, swayed by Karen's persuasive tone. Others, however, began to see cracks in her argument. A few residents recalled Alex's calm demeanor during the meeting and wondered if Karen's accusations weren't slightly exaggerated. Mrs. Peterson, who lived 2 doors down, mentioned to her husband over dinner, "You know, Alex seemed pretty reasonable to me. Maybe Karen's taking this too far." Meanwhile, Alex remained unfazed. They knew Karen wouldn't back down easily, so they took steps to protect themselves. After consulting with a lawyer friend, Alex discovered that Karen's relentless harassment might actually violate local laws regarding privacy and homeowner rights. Armed with this knowledge, they drafted a formal complaint to the HOA board, outlining Karen's behavior and requesting an investigation into potential misconduct. It was a bold move, But Alex felt confident they were within their rights. When the HOA board received Alex's complaint, they couldn't ignore it. The document was thorough, including screenshots of Karen's emails, photos of her snooping around Alex's property, and sworn statements from other neighbors who confirmed her intrusive behavior. For the first time, the board members began to question Karen's leadership. While she had always been strict, this level of obsession with a single resident raised serious red flags. Karen, oblivious to the growing backlash, doubled down on her campaign. She called emergency meetings, sent out newsletters highlighting community concerns, and even suggested implementing stricter rules to prevent future problems. But instead of rallying support, her actions only fueled resentment. Neighbors started sharing stories about their own run-ins with Karen, how she once fined Mr. Thompson for planting marigolds without approval, or how she demanded Mrs. Lewis repaint her mailbox because the color was too bold. Slowly but surely, cracks began to form in Karen's carefully constructed image of authority. One evening, as Karen sat at her kitchen table drafting yet another email to Alex, her husband walked in and sighed. "Maybe you should take a step back," he said cautiously. "People are talking, Karen. You're starting to look unreasonable." Unreasonable. The word hit her like a slap. How could anyone think she was unreasonable when all she wanted was to maintain order? Frustrated and exhausted, Karen dismissed his comment, convinced that everyone else simply didn't understand the importance of her work. But deep down, doubt began to creep in. For the first time, Karen wondered if she'd gone too far. Unfortunately for her, the wheels of change were already in motion, and there was no turning back. Karen's retaliation against Alex only made things worse for her. What she had hoped would be the final blow in her campaign to assert dominance instead became the tipping point that unraveled her authority. The HOA board, already uneasy after receiving Alex's formal complaint, decided it was time to take action. They called for an emergency session to address the growing concerns about Karen's behavior. For the first time in years, Karen found herself sitting on the receiving end of scrutiny. The meeting took place in the community center's small conference room, a space usually reserved for planning holiday decorations or discussing landscaping budgets. But this time, the atmosphere was tense. Board members shuffled papers nervously as they prepared to confront their president. When Karen walked in, clipboard in hand and wearing her usual air of confidence, she was met with silence, not the respectful kind, but the awkward, loaded kind that made her stomach churn. One by one, the board members voiced their concerns. "Karen," began Mr. Harris, the treasurer, "we've received multiple reports from residents about your approach to enforcing rules. Some feel intimidated. Others think you're overstepping." He hesitated before adding, "including this recent issue with Alex." Karen's face flushed red. Overstepping. Intimidated. She leaned forward, gripping the edge of the table. "I'm just doing my job," she snapped. "If people followed the rules, none of this would be an issue." But the board wasn't convinced. Mrs. Dawson, the secretary, chimed in next. "It's not just about following the rules, Karen. It's about how you enforce them. Constant emails, unannounced visits, spreading rumors. It's creating division in the neighborhood. And now we have documented evidence suggesting harassment." Harassment. The word hung heavy in the air. Karen opened her mouth to argue but stopped when Mr. Paddle, another board member, slid a folder across the table toward her. Inside were copies of Alex's complaint, along with supporting documents, screenshots of Karen's relentless messages, photos of her inspecting Alex's property without permission, and statements from neighbors who had grown tired of her micromanaging ways. "This isn't personal, Karen," Mr. Patel said gently. "But we need to consider whether your actions align with our mission to foster a positive, harmonious community." For once, Karen was speechless. Her mind raced, searching for a defense, but everything she thought of sounded weak even to her own ears. Instead, she resorted to what she knew best, blaming others. "Fine," she muttered bitterly. If everyone wants to side with Alex, go ahead, but don't come crying to me when things fall apart. Her words fell flat. The board didn't rise to her bait. Instead, they voted unanimously to launch an internal investigation into her conduct. Until the matter was resolved, Karen's powers as HOA president were suspended. She stormed out of the meeting, slamming the door behind her, leaving the board members to exchange weary glances. Word of the decision spread quickly through the neighborhood. Some residents celebrated quietly, relieved that Karen's reign of control might finally be over. Others remained cautious, unsure of what this meant for the future of the HOA. Meanwhile, Alex became something of a local hero. Neighbors who had previously kept their distance began approaching them, thanking them for standing up to Karen. "You've got guts," Mrs. Peterson said one afternoon while passing by Alex's house. "We needed someone to say something." As for Karen, she retreated into isolation. Without her clipboard and her title, she felt untethered, as though her entire identity had been stripped away. She avoided social gatherings and spent most of her days pacing her living room, replaying every interaction with Alex and the board in her head. Every knock at the door sent her heart racing, convinced it was another neighbor coming to criticize her. Ironically, the neighborhood began to change in subtle ways during this period. Residents started questioning outdated HOA rules, proposing reforms to make them more practical and inclusive. Alex, sensing an opportunity to help reshape the community, joined the discussion, offering suggestions based on their own experiences. Slowly but surely, the rigid structure Karen had worked so hard to maintain began to loosen, and no amount of anger or frustration on her part could stop it. By the time the investigation concluded, the damage to Karen's reputation was irreversible. The board decided to remove her as president permanently, citing a loss of trust among residents. To add insult to injury, Alex was approached by several neighbors. The removal of Karen as HOA president marked the beginning of a new chapter for the neighborhood, one that felt lighter, freer, and more united than ever before. Without her constant oversight and rigid enforcement of trivial rules, residents began to breathe easier. Lawns were mowed when people had time, not because they feared a fine. Mailboxes stayed slightly crooked if homeowners couldn't be bothered to fix them. And yes, a few gnomes, and even some flamingos, popped up in yards, bringing color and personality back to the once uniform streets. For the first time in years, the community started to feel less like a regulated subdivision and more like an actual neighborhood. Karen, on the other hand, struggled to adjust to her diminished role. Stripped of her title and influence, she became a shadow of her former self. She attended HOA meetings sporadically at first, sitting quietly in the back with arms crossed, glaring at anyone who dared make eye contact. But over time, she stopped showing up altogether. Her daily patrols through the neighborhood ceased, replaced by long hours spent indoors staring out her window, muttering under her breath about how things used to be. Some neighbors felt a pang of sympathy for her. After all, Karen hadn't always been this way. Before the power of the presidency went to her head, she'd simply been a woman who cared deeply about her community, or at least her vision of it. But others, including Alex, saw her downfall as inevitable. She built her identity around control. Alex remarked to Mrs. Peterson one afternoon while chatting over the fence, "When you live like that, it's only a matter of time before reality catches up." Meanwhile, the HOA underwent significant changes under its newly elected president, Mr. Harris. With input from residents, the board revised many of the outdated rules that had caused so much tension. The infamous neutral tones only policy for outdoor decorations was scrapped, allowing families to express themselves however they liked. Even the dreaded pre-approval process for minor yard additions was relaxed, requiring approval only for larger installations. These reforms didn't just improve morale, they fostered a sense of ownership and pride among residents. Alex, though they declined a formal position on the board, remained an active voice in the community. Their calm, reasonable approach during the conflict with Karen inspired others to speak up about their own frustrations with the old system. Neighbors who had once tiptoed around Karen now openly shared ideas for improving shared spaces, organizing events, and making the neighborhood more welcoming. Block parties returned after years of absence, and a community garden project gained traction, thanks in part to Alex's quiet encouragement. As for Karen, her presence faded into the background. She eventually sold her home and moved to a quieter area outside the city, where no HOA existed to remind her of what she had lost. Rumor had it that she joined a book club there, though whether she dominated discussions or learned to listen remained unclear. Either way, life in the subdivision carried on without her. In the end, the neighborhood emerged stronger, not despite the drama, but because of it. What started as a clash between two individuals evolved into a collective effort to redefine what it meant to live together harmoniously. Alex proved that standing up for oneself could spark meaningful change, while Karen's fall served as a cautionary tale about the dangers of wielding power without empathy. And as the seasons changed, so did the spirit of the community. Where once there had been fear and resentment, there was now laughter and connection. Children played freely in cul-de-sacs, dogs barked happily behind fences, and yes, even a cheerful little gnome stood proudly near Alex's porch, a silent reminder that sometimes breaking the rules can lead to something beautiful.